Hello, and welcome back to the World of Wysteria. We'll now conclude Chapter 29 with Part 3. "Are you serious?" she asked. "It's lovely out," he answered casually. "I think we should take in the town." Emily looked mystified. "We're going under cover," he said. "Disguises!" she exclaimed. "How fun!" She scampered over to the racks of clothing and began leafing through the dresses. "Should I wear that fancy blue one?" she asked. "No, something less eye-catching," he told her. "We want to blend in." Will returned to the back of the room and selected an outfit for himself: a plain white shirt, brown pants and boots, and a dark gray jacket. After changing and looking in the mirror, he decided he was still too recognizable and began searching for something to cover his head. "How's it going?" he called out to Emily, as he spied a black hat with a wide brim on one of the shelves. "Just about ready," she answered. Will grabbed the hat, stepped back to the mirror, and tried it on. Emily then appeared, wearing a short brown vest over a white blouse with long sleeves and a full forest green skirt. "What do you think?" she asked him. "Does this look common enough?" "Perfect," he said. "But that drifter still might be able to pick you out, even at a distance." "Yes, I suppose he could." After thinking for a moment, Emily walked back to the front of the shop and disappeared behind a row of shelves. Will took a last quick look in the mirror. His clothes fit well and looked natural on him. The hat was a little large, but that was just as well, for it hid more of his face. Satisfied with his disguise, he then followed Emily's trail and found her standing behind one of the counters, holding a blonde wig in her hands. "Look what I found," she said, giggling. She stepped over to a small mirror that hung on the wall, placed the wig on her head, and began tucking her dark hair under the long golden curls. "What do you think?" she asked, turning and facing him. "Cute," he said, "but too cute, I think." Emily looked in the mirror again. "Yes, I don't want to look like I just stepped out of a beauty parlor." She began combing her fingers through the blonde locks, pulling on and disheveling the tight curls. "How's that?" she asked. "Much better," he said. She then stared at his hat. "Something wrong?" Will asked her. "Your hat." "I don't really care for it either," he confessed. "I've never been much of a hat person." "No," she said. "It's cute, but too cute." Emily took the hat from his head, studied it briefly, then tossed it on the floor and stomped on it several times. She then picked it up, punched the crown back into shape with her fist, and handed it to Will. "There," she said, with a pleased grin. Expressionless, Will looked at the hat, then at her. "Thank you," he said, putting it back on his head. Emily curtsied. "You're welcome, my lord." "So, now that we're suitably disguised, what's your plan?" she asked. "Well," he said, walking over to the window, "they're here for a fight, and I don't intend to wait for them to throw the first punch. Will peered through the glass, making sure the intruders still held their same positions. On the opposite side of the square, the sentry remained at his post above the gate, his back to them now, watching the street below him. The others, at least those whom he could see from here, hadn't moved. So, the plan, he continued, turning to face her, is to go on the offensive, surprise them with a show of force, damage as many of them as possible, and then capture one of them, preferably our old friend out there. Capture him? Yes, if possible. And then what? Hold him hostage? No, he said. I doubt he'd be worth anything to anyone. I want him to deliver a message to Nathan. What kind of message? She asked. I'm not going to threaten or insult him. I want this to end, not escalate, he told her. It's probably useless to appeal to Nathan's sense of right and wrong. But maybe I can convince him that this war is not in his best interest. I want to give him a way to step away from this feud without having to admit defeat. I see, said Emily. So, in a nutshell, we grab one guy and beat up the rest. She thought for a second, then smiled. I think it sounds like a wonderful plan. Will leaned over and kissed her lightly on the lips. Just remember, he said, taking her hands and holding them tenderly, but speaking in a firm voice. This is not a game. I believe I can beat them, he continued. But even if these men are nothing more than run-of-the-mill drifters, the best-case scenario, this will still be very dangerous. And given what Iris told us, we should assume at least some of them have talents, like Daniel's associate. They might be even stronger than he was, or they might have different abilities we don't expect. So we have to be ready for anything. I understand, Emily assured him. Trusting she'd taken his words to heart, Will turned his attention back to the square outside, hoping to locate the rest of the intruders before he and Emily stepped out into their midst. It was difficult to get a clear view of the far side of the plaza. But then, looking closely, he saw a young man leaning against the wall near the southern entrance. I think I see number 10, he told Emily. Where? She asked, stepping next to Will. To the left of the gate, standing by himself. Okay, she said, I see him. And there's another on the right, he said, spotting and pointing out a man who was loitering a short distance from the entrance. So that's 11, said Emily. Assuming those two are still by the tavern, which leaves one unaccounted for. Yes. Although I believe Iris said no less than a dozen, Will reminded her. He carefully scanned the area once more. That's all I can see, he said, turning away from the window. We'll just have to be on our toes. As Will moved toward the door, he happened to notice a collection of walking sticks sprouting from a large ceramic urn against the wall on the other side of the room. He crossed the floor and began sorting through them. A prop, said Emily, or a weapon. You never know, he answered, selecting a sturdy wooden cane topped with a heavy brass knob. He struck the shaft against the palm of his hand. It might come in handy. Satisfied with his choice, he walked to the door, took a deep breath, and told her it was time to go. Hold on, she said. After a quick glance around the room, Emily headed for a display of purses next to the counter. What are you doing? He asked. Well, I need a weapon too, she replied. Not wanting her to get involved in any actual combat, Will started to object. But then he thought about the brawl in the tavern and reconsidered. Perhaps she should be armed. Okay, he said reluctantly. But please stay out of the fight unless it's absolutely necessary. Yes, yes, she muttered, picking out a large cloth pouch cinched shut with a thick drawstring. She then stepped behind the counter, opened the bag, and began loading it with heavy pieces of jewelry. Looting? He asked her. Just giving it some more punch. Will sighed heavily. You're worrying me, you know. Ignoring his comment, Emily threw a few more objects into her bag, pulled the drawstring tight, and let it hang from her wrist, testing its weight. That's better, she said, swinging it back and forth as she strolled to the door. Now, said Will, giving her a final briefing. We'll try to get as close as possible to that group of 4. The closer we get, the less time they'll have to react. Plus, there will be less chance of bystanders getting in the way. If they spot us, be prepared to charge them. I'd rather take care of the larger bunch first, and then deal with the others in turn. If possible, I'll try to grab one of them. But our main objective is to make their stay here as unpleasant as possible. And if something happens, if it looks like I can't handle them, you have to get out of here immediately, without hesitation. We know what their goal is, to snatch you and bring you to Nathan. Even if we have to retreat, as long as they don't get their hands on you, they lose. You won't be abandoning me, Emily, he emphasized to her. Once I know you've jumped away safely, I promise I'll be right behind you. Then we'll meet tomorrow at the castle. Don't try to come back tonight. Will was ready to counter any objections, but Emily offered none. Are you ready? He asked. She took a lungful of air, let it go, and nodded that she was. Will turned and looked out the small window in the door. When the next group of people walks by, we'll jump in with them. He put one hand on the latch and took her hand with the other. Will, she said quietly. Yes, he answered, his eyes on the square outside, watching for their chance to leave. I know this is a serious matter, and I fully understand the dangers. Good, he struck in. But this is going to be fun. Will sighed. Then, in spite of himself, he smiled. Yes, he said, it is. All right, And that concludes chapter 29. And now we will proceed onward with chapter 30.